Welcome to Corporate Cafecito,
a Latin and business podcast where we share insights and strategies to help entrepreneurs and professionals thrive.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Corporate Cafecito. Yo soy Nayeli Suarez Gas.
Y yo soy Carlos Butler Valle.
Today, we're going to talk about something that plagues our community, and that is survivor's guilt. Survivor's guilt is when we are doing really well, but if someone else is not doing as well as us, we may feel a lot of guilt or shame or just anxiety over our success.
Yeah, it's funny when we were first talking about this, you said survivor's guilt. I always think initially of like a different type of survivor's guilt, but it's like obviously we're all kind of in this. It feels like a race more often than not, right? To get from point A to point B.
Yeah.
And, you know, it really does kind of make sense. I mean, there's certainly, I'm sure, stories we can both share about this, but achieving success can sometimes feel bittersweet, particularly depending on sort of the folks you have, you know, around you.
Well, you know, I think about so my parents always worked in a factory. And so when I, growing up, that was what I was used to. That was like all my aunts, my uncles, my grandparents, everybody worked in a factory. And so being the first one who isn't working in a factory, I guess, two of my aunts did not, but they're the younger ones. Okay. Yeah. There is that sense of wow, I made my parents' combined income within the first 3 to 5 years out of college.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so that felt weird. Like the trips I was able to go on or the experiences I was having. And the survivor's guilt, getting choked up, was because it was based on their hard work.
Absolutely.
That I got there.
Absolutely.
And so sometimes going back, you almost don't want to share how well you've done.
Yeah.
Because you don't, they didn't get to have that same experience or to have it as easy.
Yeah. You know, thank you for that vulnerability because it's real.
It is.
Yeah. And I think, we've talked quite a bit about just even particularly those differences, even from a gender identity perspective, right? I think that hits, from all the Latinas that I know, I think again, this is anecdotal, but it feels like particularly the Latinas that I know have that survivor's guilt, because they know. And sometimes, that combined with sacrifices that they had to make sort of, with their own families and everything else.
Yeah.
But still having access to those things, having the ability to do those things, can feel really rough. When we were talking about this, you mentioned a story about, getting that first corporate bonus, but not being able to necessarily celebrate
because
that,
you're like,
right?
oh my God, I just got handed my parents' monthly income.
Yeah.
And it feels so arrogant.
Yeah.
And even I don't believe myself to be arrogant, but it's
I don't believe you to be arrogant, by the way. And I'm
I'm
getting close to the microphone for that, just to make sure the listeners hear it.
It feels like that, right?
Yeah.
I've been handed this.
It can feel selfish.
Yeah,
absolutely. And, I will say, and obviously we'll get into this, a lot more. I remember, always also feeling guilty because when I went through and did my very first calculation, I was like, oh my gosh, my mom's a teacher. She's been doing this for 30 years, and in 1 year, that equals potentially multiple years worth of, and that doesn't even include the costs, obviously the things that come out of pocket for her.
Right.
And I always felt some type of way about, sharing that information. But one of the things that I will say is that my mother in particular always spoke really highly and proudly of all of the successes that, her son was able to have. And so hopefully in this discussion, we can talk a little bit about how to kind of push through that, because I think that there's something there about being able to share those things without fear, without, any kind of concern for consequences, because what I've noticed is that that is exactly the type of thing that they like to be, you know, proud of. And
It
so,
is. And you know what? I think, when we think about even just pride, I feel so many of us have like reached that pinnacle and like made not only like our families but our community proud. Like I
absolutely.
see just people getting celebrated,
Yes.
seeing all these, like I go to a lot of awards and galas and recognitions, and I love seeing people on stage because
Yeah.
I'm like, yeah, because I'm like, when they are on stage, they represent all of us,
And
right?
wouldn't it frustrate you if they didn't necessarily share those successes? That's actually one of the things that I think about, right? It's
Yeah.
like I always try to encourage people to share their successes and their wins with their friends and family members. And so if I see them being quiet about it, I get frustrated because I'm like, I want you to do it. But yet when it comes to
Us,
us,
yeah.
it feels really, I'm going to say, uncomfortable and awkward.
Well, there's a little bit of that imposter syndrome of
Yeah.
like, I'm not that important,
You're saying within
or
your own family or
no,
just
I'm saying just
generally?
people,
Okay.
just like I'm not that important, or the work I do can be done by others, or like I don't feel like my skill set is like as valued. And then there's also the like, I don't believe that from where I came I should be able to achieve
To
this
achieve,
much.
yeah, or certainly
Yeah.
in that trajectory, right?
I
You know,
don't,
because in
yeah.
some cases, you know, you're skipping what took generations
Generations to move up
to
one
move.
economic level.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
I'm
and it's
really proud
daunting.
of the younger generations because we see you.
Yeah.
And I mean, I just see these, and I say kids, but they're so beautiful and they're graduating college and I see them with their sarape like
Yeah,
stoles and whatnot.
yes.
And they're, and they're like killing it and they're going to law school and running for office and doing all these
Or
things.
entrepreneurs before they even
Yeah, before
leave
they even.
school, which is
But
amazing.
I saw, and there's a couple. There's two young Latino men that I've seen tell their story, and I'm just like, yes, like
Yeah,
this is so beautiful,
it matters.
and I love that they're they're kind of, to me, they're so bold.
Yeah,
Where I think maybe I was more quiet,
yeah,
because I wanted to just like do the work, and I felt it was arrogant to talk about my
yeah. You were
successes, and I'm seeing some of that change, and I'm so proud of you guys.
good. You know, so let's talk about this a little bit. First and foremost, we're not psychologists,
No.
we're not mental health professionals, but there is obviously, I mean, I think we can discuss what we believe are the roots of that guilt. Right. And so we talked a little bit about the imposter syndrome. You know, it feels like it's amplified, obviously, with your family, particularly when there's family, such a stark economic contrast. Right. But you know, you talked a little bit about this, but sometimes there's that little bit of the weight of being the chosen one, or, you know, or the chosen ones, or feeling guilty about that family investment that's been made in you. And then I think one other thing that, you know, is important for us to talk about is this cultural emphasis, particularly for Latin families, around this family collective success
Yes.
versus individual achievement. So talk to me about that.
Oh, well, so it's really interesting. So it's funny when you talk about like the chosen one. I think that I think that once you go to college, you are now responsible for everybody's computer, everybody's printer,
I
everybody's
can't
cell
tell you how
phone.
many. I can't tell you how many professional certification programs we've paid for, whether it's like HR,
Yeah.
or we've paid for people's interviewing outfits, because you know,
Yeah.
you're like, oh, you're not going out there representing us looking crazy, you know. But yeah, that becomes part of that lift.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So
It's just
so
funny.
yeah, I think, but I think also being like the chosen one, it comes with the responsibility of
Yeah.
like you are now taking care of the rest.
Yes.
And I feel my uncle, he studied like engineering, and he actually became even like a professor at the end of his career. But because he did that, whenever we had math issues with math homework, he had to like they'd be like, go with your tío, and we would go over there and he would help us with our math homework. And so I think that once you become someone who has like this skill,
Yeah.
you now have
Yeah.
to do that for the
Yeah,
community.
yeah, I think the chosen one cuts two ways, right? It's the guilt that you feel about having folks invest in you, especially if there's a disparity. I mean, there's five of us, right? And all of us were very, very different. And, there were times where I felt a little bit of guilt because when I traveled to Japan for a year as an exchange student, that wasn't free.
Right.
And that was something that my other brothers and sisters did not necessarily partake in. And I was like, there were times where I was like, oh my gosh, like I'm receiving something that others aren't necessarily receiving. I don't want to feel guilty about that. But and then on the other end of that is once you are kind of the quote chosen one, then you have that responsibility to kind of pay it forward.
Wow, we're talking about the chosen one in two very
That's
different ways.
That's how I was thinking about it.
No,
Yeah.
to me, the chosen one is what I'm saying. The like you do something because I did not like my parents didn't pay for my college or
Yeah,
for my study
same.
abroad
Yeah,
trip.
yeah.
Like I had to pay it all myself. I worked 2 jobs, 77 hours a week. But
77.
yeah, I remember because I used to calculate it
Yeah.
every week. But to me, the chosen one is like now that you've done that and that you have found success, you are responsible for the success of the others.
And the way that I'm talking about it is, particularly for me and my family, there are the majority of the folks, either chose not to go to college or, for one reason or another couldn't go to college. And there were a lot of experiences where they felt like, oh, I don't get to be a part of that. Carlos is the chosen one, and it's like, well, no, not necessarily. But I think that dynamic does exist, unfortunately, a lot in our families.
Yeah, and there becomes
so
the
that's why I was
jealousy
thinking
even.
about that, yeah.
I had a very beautiful moment with one of my cousins, and I didn't realize, so on my dad's side, I'm one of 60 grandkids. On my mom's side, I'm one of 18.
Okay.
I think the numbers are more or less accurate. I was the oldest on my mom's side. I'm like some of the oldest on my dad's side, but I have cousins who are like 20 years older than me. When I was visiting my cousin who now lives in Europe, she lives in Barcelona. She went over there to study.
Very nice.
And she said, if you hadn't shown that we could go to Europe to study, I don't know if any of the rest of us would have gone.
Wow.
And so I took that moment and I was like, okay, like get over the guilt of like what you have been able to experience and achieve, because I've been like setting that like path or doing that role modeling what you can do.
Can I talk about then the opposite side of that when it comes to the root of the guilt, which is that fear that success changes you or distances you from your roots?
I think it does sometimes.
Because I've experienced that a lot, where people have been like, oh, wow, you're different. You're not the same. Or, because in other jobs that I've had, I've been able to travel, and sometimes I get to go to nice places. But I try to explain to people that when you're working, you're literally like, you don't, there's no fun, right? But it doesn't matter. Like when they hear or see that, they're like, oh, well, you're different.
You're better.
You're not.
You're better. Than us.
Yeah. And so I think we're just, whether that is stated explicitly or not, I will tell you for me, that has always been a root of that kind of guilt, which is I don't want people to necessarily. And so I actually stopped sharing where I was traveling to or where I was going or
which is exactly what we're saying.
I know. But it's true.
It's interesting how you're like, I love this because I think the difference in how we're seeing this topic just shows like it's going to be personal to you.
Absolutely.
Like there's no one way to talk about this guilt of success or the survivor's guilt. Because when I think about like how it distances me from my roots, I think about like me saying, no, I'm not going to that wedding. Or
interesting.
Yeah, which may have been seen as a snub, but I was so tired and I traveled all week and I just didn't feel like going, or I getting on a plane that weekend, or taking my 2 under 2 to Mexico for that. And so, and then there's like that repercussion of like, well, you're distancing yourself from the family. And I'm like, but I'm tired. I need to recharge.
Yeah.
And sometimes like, that's to me. And even like, oh my God, when I had a like part-time nanny And, you talk about distancing myself from my roots. Like, that's not what a good Mexican mother
Yeah.
does. And
Yeah.
why are you doing that for your children?
Yeah.
And so to me, I was so like happy because my husband works evenings and I work days. So we just needed someone to cover the
Yeah.
gap. And I was like, this is the perfect solution.
It's a soul sacrifice, by the way.
And then I was like, but I'm still doing it wrong.
Yeah. I totally hear you. I think, by the way, based on what I know of your family, I feel like you've got a lot of awesome, really like successful
Oh my God,
people
my
in your
family
family
is
too.
amazing.
And so like I think that is part of potentially the dynamic.
But that's what brings us to this, right?
Yeah.
Is that how much of that was in my head?
Yeah, that's exactly
How
right.
much of it was not real?
How much
of
do we
it
carry that
Right.
forward too, right?
So instead, we should just be telling each other like our wins.
Yeah.
We should be like magnifying. We should be saying like, you know what, I did this and it went great, and you might want to consider something, or not even giving it as advice, but just saying like, tell me something that went well. And one of my friends, she does when she has her family, for dinner at night, she'll say like, tell me something that went well and something that went bad. And I told her, I'm like, I'm only going to answer the what went well, because I'm not going to look for the bad.
Yeah.
Like I'm done looking for the bad. The bad's always there.
Yeah,
So I'm just going to talk about the good
wins.
stuff.
Well, so let's talk about that mindset shift, right? Because I think that's really important. Obviously, part of the reason why we talk about this is to shine light on it. But then the other aspect of this is like, how can we then sort of shift our own mindset around the thinking? And one of the things that I think I still need to practice, but I've gotten better at, is this notion of why me versus why not me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
I agree, because there's so many of us. And so, I think that the whole like why me makes it feel like undeserving.
Yeah.
Like I shouldn't be here. And it's like, why? You are capable.
Yes.
You are. I always tell
You've earned
anyone who's gotten an interview, I'm like, you got that interview because you are a candidate for that job.
And you've earned it.
No,
you have earned it.
No one's going to interview you for fun. No one's going to waste their time on someone who, like, they're not going to do a throwaway interview.
Yeah.
Like, their time is very valuable, and they don't want to waste it interviewing someone who's not a candidate. So if you are in the room, you may be the next person in that role.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think another thing to keep in mind, and you talked about this a little bit, right? But success is part of the responsibility. It's not a betrayal, so it's not like my success is taking away. It's how do you, especially if your family has sacrificed so much to get you to where it is, it's part of your responsibility to be successful.
Yeah. I mean, I think all of our parents have said to us, quiero que seas mejor que yo. And it's our responsibility to do that. Like, you brought us here, you made this sacrifice, you came to this country. My parents didn't know English, still don't know English.
Your mom is so cute though.
You come to this country and it's like, this is what they sacrifice for. We owe it to them.
I absolutely believe that. I think another thing to keep in mind, and you talked about this again as well, is that your platform coming from that success becomes ideally your family's platform, right?
Yeah.
You talked about your uncle being the engineer and how then that becomes an added resource that maybe you didn't necessarily have before, or just the work that you do. I'm sure, listen, solicited or not, I know that you are constantly looking and scanning, particularly with your family, as they're going into professional spaces, to be able to say, hey, listen, for what it's worth, I'm a career coach, and here are some things that I've noticed, or maybe have you thought about this, or whatever it is. That's beautiful. I mean, that's stuff that we don't all necessarily have access to. So now your platform has become someone else's platform.
And I also feel that, like, if we really want to change this survivor's guilt, we need to help others survive.
Oh, I love that.
We need to bring them along with us. We need to tell our story. We need to tell them it's okay. That's why some of our guests on Corporate Cafecito have been people who have started businesses and failed.
Yeah.
Because you know what? You got to dust yourself up and get back up.
Yeah.
But, I think what we need to do is learn how to speak about what we do well. Celebrate our wins. Push others to win.
Yes.
Right? Like, move up, move along. And I also think we need to get really comfortable with success.
Yes.
Especially if you think about, like, we're going to make up 1/3 of the workforce by 2030.
Yes.
2030 is like 5 minutes away.
5
It's
minutes
going to be
away.
2030 in no
Como se
time.
dice, un cierra y abrir de los
Yeah.
ojos, ¿no?
Yeah.
Yes.
And so when we get there, we can't be these head down, do my work,
Yeah.
concentrate people. We need to be this boastful community, and we need to show that it is okay to be boastful. It is, and not boastful in an arrogant way,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
just
yeah.
like
Yeah.
celebrate. Like that's what our culture is known for. If you look at any Mexican movie, they're celebrating. There's the big fan, like
Yeah.
do that with our
Yeah.
successes.
You know, I have a nephew that I'm very proud of. He's going out there doing some really awesome things in technology. He's a co-founder, and one of the things that I said to him the last time that we connected was, don't carry any guilt with you when it comes to your success. No one knows what you've sacrificed but you. And at the end of the day, when, not if, you become successful, you have to keep in mind that if it's not you, then who, right?
Right.
If it's not you, it'll be somebody
It'll be
else.
somebody
so why
else, but
not
they're
let
gonna
that
get
be
it.
you, right?
Let it
and
be you.
so by the way, that's not necessarily advice that I had gotten from my family, but that is part of that, right?
Yeah.
That continuing to sort of,
Which
pay
I
it
love.
forward.
I think we're getting there, right? I think we're
Yeah,
getting it
I
there.
agree.
I think we're the generation that's like a little slower. I think the younger generation is
But
getting
we're
it.
pushing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I see like the shirts that you got this mija and all
Yeah.
those, and I'm like, yeah, like it's a very like if there's one thing our culture is known for, it's celebration and love, right?
Yeah.
Like we celebrate big, we love big. So our successes should be part of that celebration and part of
I
that
agree.
love.
I agree.
So let's talk about how you do that.
Yeah.
One is bringing others along.
Agreed.
You have to bring others along on your journey. It is your responsibility as the big sister, big brother of the next generation. Like we need to foster that engagement. I love that I could call a group of friends and say like, hey, I'm helping this person look for a job. What do we got out there for him?
Yeah.
And we're like, okay, how about this? How about this? How about this? How about this? And let's call this person. And I'm like, we need to give, but we
Yeah.
need to give freely.
Agreed.
In order to do that, though, we need to get over some of this guilt and we need to learn how to ask.
Yes.
We cannot give if we don't know what you need.
I agree.
And so being very vocal about it, which feels like
Can feel awkward.
so awkward because you're like, I need to ask for help.
Yeah.
Or I know if it could be easier if you had someone else holding your hand, let us hold your hand and speak up so that we can do that.
I agree. I think another really important thing is never underestimate how much you sharing your story can really help others. And it's not about humble bragging. It's not about any of these things. It's just simply sharing your journey, whether it's, and I know you've done this, whether it's at like a kid's school or
I love kids'
maybe,
schools.
in a speaking engagement or whatever that might be, or maybe you're at a networking event and, you're sharing this information with someone that you recently met. Like, there are so many different ways to do this, but don't cover your light. I think,
Right.
and it's not, again, to be purposefully boastful. It's just simply saying, I'm going to be me. And for whatever it's worth, if this knowledge helps someone, it's a win-win situation.
And the other thing I would say is if you're making good money, invest in our future.
Agreed.
Like go to the galas, go to the fundraisers. Anything that has to do with kids or first generation college scholarships and all that, like I go. Like that is a cause I give my money to. I believe in helping the next generation succeed. I know how hard it was to go to college. I don't think you could work 2 full-time jobs in college right now.
No.
And I don't think that colleges will let you just pay cash.
Yeah, that's true.
But I think it is important for us to show our support for the next generation. And that may be through donating to scholarships. It may be by creating an internship if you have the ability to create an internship in your workplace. And I also think it's, like that mentoring of helping the next person find their way.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've talked about some things that you can do, that we can do, our listeners can do for others. Let's talk a little bit about things that you can do for yourself. We talked about this a lot on the podcast, but one of the really important things, certainly to us, is having a therapist or some type of mental health support,
100%.
particularly if you can find one that understands some of these cultural dynamics, it can really take you, I think, even further.
Yes.
That doesn't mean that it has to be necessarily that, but there are certainly, I think, different things. I mean, just think about the fact that you and I were thinking about the chosen one in two very different
Yeah.
ways, right? I mean, and again, we're both Latins, we're both,
Yeah.
we're both first gen, so like there are nuances there, and it's just having that mental health professional that can help guide you through those feelings of guilt and how to manage them. I think it's just really, really important.
I agree. And building on that, I would also say is like when you have a dream and you have a path, like fight for it.
Yeah.
Don't let the fear of alienating your community or your family or your roots stop you, because you may be that person that's trailblazing. You may be
Yeah.
that person that we need to show us the path and tell us,
Yeah.
like, no, si se puede, and you could go and you have to do it this way, and it's going to suck for a little bit, but then it's going to be amazing. So, if we feel pressure or you feel like giving up, just go through the reasons why you feel like giving up. And
Yeah.
if one of them is because I don't want to impact my family or my friends or whatever, then take inventory of like what that means to you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think to that, and as we wrap up,
Mm-hmm.
one of the things that, that's important to us as we think about topics is, we don't imagine we're the only ones that are necessarily feeling these things. And we also recognize that we have a really broad range of listeners
Yes.
to Corporate Cafecito.
All
So
over
we
the
want to just
world.
say that, obviously we're talking particularly about our experiences as Latinos, but the reality is that there are others that experience it in different ways. And so one of the things that we would love to hear, obviously, as you're thinking about this is, we'd love to we'd love for you to share your stories about, kind of your own experiences, and how you've navigated through some of this challenge, because again, it's that storytelling that actually really makes a big difference, because it builds community in ways, and also I think that visibility is just so
because then it
critical.
becomes normal.
Yeah,
Then
absolutely.
it becomes normal for us to get law degrees and be recognized and lead companies and be CEOs. Like, if we hear about it, then we know we can do it. And the more people that do it, the easier it feels.
That's exactly right. And if you haven't yet, one of the things that I would like to highly encourage folks is, especially as you're getting close to open enrollment time, take a look at different benefits that you might have. In many cases, actually, there's either EAPs or employee assistance programs that provide free sessions, or at least a certain amount of free sessions. There might be different benefit plans that might offer different opportunities to access, maybe some sort of mental health support.
That's right. The brain is also in Oregon.
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe even some financial planning, because I think that
agree.
there are times where you go through maybe just going through that process of that financial planning helps you in some way, shape, or form. Yeah, and if maybe you can uncover through that process an opportunity for you to give back, so that you can contribute to the community, maybe for the first time or in a different way.
I think you are setting us up for some good guest speakers.
There we go. Listen, that's how we do. Awesome.
So, well, thank you for joining us. This is a topic that obviously I feel is very personal, because we want to move forward, but it only works if we all move forward collectively.
Absolutely.
And you need to pave the way so others can follow. So sometimes overcoming that guilt is the biggest gift you could give your community.
Yeah, and I would say if you haven't yet, maybe you don't necessarily feel like you have to share everything, but find one thing that you're really proud of that you will feel comfortable sharing with your close family circle, and just go through that process, because sometimes just doing it, the more we do it, the better we ultimately feel about it. So, gracias. Thank you for joining us at this episode of Corporate Cafecito.
Nos vemos la próxima vez.